My daughter's graduation should have been one of the best days of my life. I've been looking forward to it for 4 years. 4 years of tuition payments, weekend phone calls, driving 8 hours round trip whenever she needed something from home. 4 years of telling anyone who'd listen that my daughter was studying nursing at Penn State. I was the kind of proud that makes you tear up in the grocery store when you see a graduation card display. My coworker Ray caught me doing exactly that in March. I didn't even try to explain myself. Nora was my only child. Her mother and I divorced when Nora was 11, and the years after that weren't easy on either of us. We figured it out, though. Nora and I figured it out. Every other weekend became our thing. Fishing on Saturday mornings, bad action movies Saturday nights, pancakes on Sunday before I drove her back. When she got older and those weekends stopped being mandatory, she still called. She still came home for Christmas. She still sent me photos of things she thought I'd find funny. So when she called me in January of her senior year to say she had news, I assumed it was about a job. She'd been applying to hospitals around Philadelphia. I was already mentally preparing to help her move. It wasn't about a job. "Dad, I want you to meet Colt," she said. "We've been together for about 5 months. I really want you two to get along." I told her, of course. Of course I wanted to meet him. I asked the normal questions. Where's he from? What does he do? She said he was from somewhere outside of Scranton, that he did sales, that he was a little older than her. She said it quickly, the way you say something when you're hoping someone won't ask a follow-up. He was 38. She was 23. I didn't say anything about the age gap. I'm not a fool. I know that saying the wrong thing to your adult daughter about her boyfriend is one of the faster ways to lose your relationship with her. I asked if I could come up to campus to take them both to dinner sometime. She said she'd check with him. She checked with him for 6 weeks before she finally said he was free. We met at an Italian place near campus, the kind with checkered tablecloths and a basket of bread that arrives before you've even sat down all the way. Colt was already there when I arrived. He stood up to shake my hand, and I noticed he didn't smile until after I did. He was good-looking in a careful, maintained kind of way. Nice watch. Nice shoes. The kind of put together that takes effort but is meant to look effortless. Dinner was fine, on the surface. We talked about Nora's upcoming graduation, her job prospects, her plans, but every time I directed a question at Nora, Colt answered first. Not rudely, smoothly, like he'd had a lot of practice at being the most important person in a conversation. At one point, I asked Nora if she'd heard back from Jefferson Hospital. She opened her mouth and Colt said, "We're actually thinking she might take a little time off before diving into the hospital world. Travel, decompress, you know. She's been running hard for 4 years. Nora nodded. I looked at her. "Is that what you want?" She looked at him before she answered me. "I think it could be good." I ate my chicken parmesan and kept my thoughts to myself. On the drive home that night, I called my brother. He lives in Columbus, but we've always been close. He's the person I call when I need to say something I can't say to anyone else. I told him about Colt. I told him about the way Nora had looked to him before answering my question. "That could be nothing," my brother said. "Could be," I said. I knew it wasn't. Over the following months, things shifted in ways that were hard to name precisely but impossible to miss. Nora stopped calling on Sunday nights. Our calls moved to Tuesday afternoons, then every other week, then whenever she got around to it. She didn't come home for Easter, which she'd never missed in her adult life. Colt had made plans, she said. A trip to the Outer Banks with his friends. When I asked if I was invited, there was a pause. "It's kind of a couples thing, Dad. You'd be bored." I had never been the kind of father who needed to be included in everything, but I noticed that I was being included in less and less. I noticed that when I asked Nora about her life, her answers had started to sound like summaries of things Colt had told her to think. In June, I drove up to help her move out of her apartment. Colt wasn't there. "Working," she said. I loaded boxes into my truck, while Nora wrapped dishes in newspaper. We had a few hours alone together, and for a little while, it felt like the old days. She laughed at something I said. She told me about a nursing school friend who'd gotten engaged. She seemed like herself. Then she got a text and her whole face rearranged. "Colt's almost done. He's coming to help with the last load." And just like that, she was somewhere else. Not physically, but that version of my daughter who'd been laughing with me 5 minutes ago simply stepped back, and a more careful, more guarded version stepped forward. I saw it happen. I can't unsee it. I helped carry the last 3 boxes, and then I went home. By September, Nora had moved into Colt's apartment in Allentown. She wasn't working yet. Still decompressing, I was told. When I asked how she was affording things, she said Colt was helping her out. When I asked about the hospital applications, she said she was reconsidering nursing altogether. When I pushed a little, gently, she said, "Dad, I know you don't like Colt, but you need to stop projecting." I hadn't said a single negative word about Colt to her face. Not one. I called my brother again that night. "Something's wrong," I said. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to pay attention." Paying attention turned out to mean something specific, because around that same time, I ran into a man named Gene at a hardware store in my town. Gene was the father of a girl named Priya who had briefly dated Colt, apparently about 2 years before he met Nora. I only knew this because Gene and I had talked briefly at a community fundraiser the previous spring when Colt's name came up in passing. I hadn't thought much about it at the time, but I thought about it now. I looked Gene up, found his number through a mutual contact, and I called him. What Gene told me took about 45 minutes and left me sitting in my driveway long after I'd pulled in. Priya had dated Colt for about 8 months. In that time, he'd convinced her to quit a marketing job she loved because he said the hours were damaging their relationship. He'd moved her into his apartment, put her in a position where she depended on him financially, and then systematically cut her off from friends and family by always creating conflict or inconvenience whenever she tried to make plans with them. When she eventually tried to leave, he told her she'd never manage on her own. She spent 6 months believing him before she got out. Gene's voice was steady when he told me all of this, but I could hear something underneath it. The particular exhaustion of a parent who'd watched their child go through something terrible and had felt helpless the entire time. "I tried to warn her," he said. "She didn't speak to me for 4 months. What finally got through? She got out on her own," he said. "I couldn't make it happen. She had to see it herself." I thanked him and sat in my truck for a long time after we hung up. I am a man who has spent his career working in facilities management for a mid-sized manufacturing company. I am not dramatic. I don't make grand gestures. I fix problems methodically, one piece at a time, and I document everything because in my line of work, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. I started writing things down, not obsessively, not in a way that would look unhinged if anyone ever saw it. Just a notebook where I kept dates, quotes, observations. The date Nora said she wasn't coming home for Thanksgiving. First time in her life. The exact words she used when I asked if she was happy, which were, "Colt says I have a tendency to catastrophize, so I'm trying not to read too much into things." The date her college roommate texted me, out of the blue, to ask if Nora was okay because she hadn't responded to messages in weeks. That last one I saved. I kept every text. I kept emails. I kept voicemails. I also, quietly and carefully, reached out to 2 other women. Gene had mentioned that Priya knew of at least one other woman who'd had a similar experience with Colt. It took some time, but through a chain of careful conversations, I eventually connected with a woman named Sylvia who dated him 3 years before Priya. She lived in Harrisburg now, and she agreed to meet me for coffee. Sylvia was in her mid-30s, a teacher, composed and precise. She told me what had happened with the kind of flat calm that comes from having processed something so many times it no longer surprises you. Same pattern. Different apartment. She'd lost her job, her savings, a year of her life. When she finally left, he told mutual friends that she'd had a breakdown. She showed me a screenshot on her phone. A message Colt had sent her after the breakup, which contained a specific phrase about how she'd never be able to function independently without him. I asked if she'd be willing to write down what she told me, in her own words, as a formal statement. She thought about it for a long moment. "If it helps someone else," she said, "yes." I drove home that day with something I hadn't had in months. Not hope exactly, more like direction. I want to be honest about what I was feeling during this time because it wasn't righteous or clean. I was terrified. I was watching my daughter disappear in slow motion and I couldn't reach her. Every time I tried to talk to her directly, my words came back to me, filtered through whatever Colt had told her to think about me. According to him, I had never approved of anyone she dated. According to him, I was controlling. According to him, my concern was really about my own ego. None of this was true. But she believed it, or was trying to. And the more I pushed, the more I confirmed the story he was telling about me. So I stopped pushing. I kept calling. I kept showing up when she'd let me. I sent her a card on her birthday with a note that said I loved her no matter what, and I'd be there whenever she needed me. I didn't mention Colt. I didn't mention my concerns, and I kept building my file. By February, I had written statements from Sylvia and from Priya herself, who had agreed to participate after her father spoke with her. I had the text from Nora's roommate. I had a timeline of Nora's increasingly limited contact with anyone outside of Colt's circle. I had a document from a therapist I'd spoken with. Not a diagnosis, she was clear about that, but a written explanation of coercive control patterns, which matched what I was observing almost exactly. I didn't know what I was going to do with any of it. I just knew I needed to have it. Then in March, Nora called to tell me she and Colt were engaged. I said congratulations. She sounded happy, or something performing happiness convincingly. She said they wanted to get married in June, which was 3 months away. She said it would be a small ceremony, just close family and friends. Will I be there? I asked. Silence. Dad, of course, you'll be there. But when the details started coming in, through texts, never a phone call, I began to understand what there meant. There was a venue in the Poconos. There would be about 60 guests. There would be a rehearsal dinner the night before. I was not invited to the rehearsal dinner. I was told via text that my seat at the ceremony would be in the 3rd row, not the front, because Colt's family needs the front rows. There were 4 people in Colt's immediate family. I let it go. Then 2 weeks before the wedding, Nora called. She was crying. Not the way people cry at good news, the kind of crying that means something has already been decided. Colt thinks it would be better, she said, if you just attended the reception, not the ceremony. I sat down. He wants me to miss my daughter's wedding ceremony. He says you make him nervous and he doesn't want to be anxious on our wedding day. I know it's not ideal, Dad, but it's his day too. I was quiet for long enough that she said my name. I'll be there, I said. Whatever you need. When I arrived at the reception venue, a lodge near a lake, nice enough, the kind of place you'd rent for a corporate retreat, I was directed to a table near the back corner. Not the family table, not a table with anyone I knew. A table with what I can only describe as the overflow guests. People who were there because someone felt obligated to invite them. And at my seat, instead of a folded napkin and a name card, there was a small piece of paper that said, "Good luck getting comfortable, old man." And a gift bag containing, I am not making this up, a travel-sized bottle of antacid and a pair of earplugs. The table around me was laughing. Not all of them. A couple of people looked uncomfortable, but enough of them. Colt was across the room watching, and when my eyes met his, he raised his glass slightly. My daughter was looking at the floor. I picked up the note. I read it once more. I put it in my jacket pocket. I have been asked many times since then what I was feeling in that moment. The honest answer is that I felt very little, which sounds strange. But I had spent months preparing for something. I had been very, very patient, and I had in the inside pocket of my jacket a USB drive and a phone with 2 contacts already pulled up and ready to call. I stood up. Colt said loudly from across the room, "Aw, is Dad going to make a speech?" There was laughter. Not kind laughter. I said, "Actually, yes, I am." The room got a little quiet. Colt's expression shifted. Not much, but enough. He hadn't expected that. I spoke clearly without raising my voice because I've learned over 60 years that a calm voice carries further than a loud one and lands harder. I said that I was glad to be there. I said that I loved my daughter more than I could ever say, and I said that before we all raised a glass, I wanted to make sure everyone in the room had the full picture of the man she was marrying. Then I nodded to a friend of mine named Dwight, who was seated near the venue's AV equipment, because I had called ahead and asked if he'd be willing to help me with one thing, and Dwight had said yes without asking many questions, because that is the kind of friend Dwight is. The screen at the front of the room flickered on. What played was not dramatic. It was not a confrontation video or a hidden camera reveal. It was a simple recording. Sylvia, sitting at her kitchen table, speaking calmly and clearly about what Colt had done to her. Her name on the screen, her face visible. Her own words. Then Priya, same format. Then a third woman, someone I hadn't met in person but who had contacted me after Priya shared what we were doing, who had her own story to tell. 3 women. 3 years. The same pattern, described independently, in their own words. The room was completely silent. I looked at my daughter. She was standing very still. Her face had gone through several things in quick succession. Disbelief, anger at me, confusion, and then something else. Something slower and more painful. Recognition. Colt started talking. He was good at talking. He immediately launched into the version of events where I was a controlling, jealous father who had fabricated a smear campaign against an innocent man. His voice was steady and convincing, and I could see a few people in the room beginning to nod, and that's when Nora's phone rang. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. The name on her phone was Priya, the real Priya, calling in real time, because I had asked her if she'd be willing to be available, and she had said yes. My daughter stepped outside to take the call. She was outside for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. When she came back in, Colt was still talking. She walked past him without looking at him. She walked to my table in the corner. She sat down across from me, and she looked at me for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I tried," I said. "You weren't ready to hear it." She nodded very slowly. She picked up my little gift bag from the table, the antacid and the earplugs, and she set it down in front of her and just stared at it. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she said. I reached across the table and I held her hand. She was shaking. I was shaking a little too, though I tried not to let her see it. "There's nothing to be sorry for," I said. "You were deceived by someone who is very good at deceiving people. That's not a character flaw. That's just bad luck." She laughed, just barely, the way you laugh when the only other option is crying. There was no wedding that day. There was a great deal of confusion and raised voices, and at least one conversation that required the venue manager to get involved. Colt left eventually with 2 of his groomsmen. I heard later that he called my daughter 4 times from the parking lot. She didn't answer. The guests filtered out. Some of them stopped to say something kind to me on their way. A woman I'd never met put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Good for you." An older gentleman, one of Colt's relatives actually, stopped in front of me and said, without making eye contact, "I didn't know about the others." He said it like a confession. Nora and I sat at that corner table until almost everyone was gone. We talked for a long time about nothing important. Her nursing job prospects, a show she'd been watching, a memory she had of the 2 of us fishing when she was about 9 years old. The summer I'd let her stay up past midnight because the fish were biting and neither of us wanted to stop. It wasn't a repair. You don't repair years of drift in an evening, but it was a beginning, and I'm old enough to know that a beginning is not nothing. She's been in therapy since July, good therapy, with someone she chose herself. She texted me after her 3rd session to say that she'd started to understand some things, and that she wished she'd listened to me sooner, and that she was glad I hadn't given up on her. I wrote back, "I never once considered it. I want to say one more thing, to anyone who might be watching this and recognizing something. A father, a mother, a friend, someone who is watching someone they love disappear in real time while the person responsible tells everyone you're the problem. Be patient, document, reach out to others who have seen what you've seen, and don't stop showing up even when they turn you away. Especially then, you are not overreacting, you are not being controlling, you are being a parent. And sometimes being a parent means waiting outside a locked door for as long as it takes. Because you know that eventually, if you raise them right, they'll remember you're there." Nora remembered. That's enough for me. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened, not just at that lodge in the Poconos, but in the years leading up to it. And the thing I keep coming back to isn't the look on Colt's face when the screen lit up, or even the moment Nora sat down across from me and said she was sorry. What I keep coming back to is a much quieter question. What kind of man did I choose to be when it would have been very easy to choose differently? Because I want to be honest about the temptation to blow things up early. There were nights, a lot of them, where I wanted to call my daughter and say everything I was thinking, lay it all out, force her to see what I was seeing. I wanted to be loud about it. I wanted to be right out loud, where she could hear me. That instinct is not wrong. It comes from love, but love without patience isn't always useful. And I had to learn that the hard way. Over months of phone calls she cut short and texts she answered in ways that didn't quite sound like her. What I did instead was choose intelligence over impulse. I documented. I listened. I reached out to Sylvia, to Priya's father Jean, to women who'd been through something I was only beginning to understand. I built something real instead of just reacting to something painful. That's not a naturally satisfying way to operate. Human beings are wired for that kind of slow patience. But I have come to believe that the most important decisions we make aren't the ones we make in anger. They're the ones we make after we sit with our anger long enough that it becomes something steadier. There's also something I want to say about Nora because I think it matters. She didn't fail some test. She was deceived by someone who had practiced deceiving people for years before she ever met him. Smart people get deceived. Careful people get deceived. Loving people get deceived. Sometimes especially them, because their instinct is to give the benefit of the doubt, and Colt understood exactly how to exploit that. What Nora showed when she finally walked past him to come sit with me wasn't weakness for covering. It was a kind of courage that I think most people underestimate. The courage to admit that what you believe was wrong in front of 60 people on what was supposed to be the best day of your life. That takes something. I don't know if I would have had it at 23, what I've learned, and I say this as a man who spent 30 years fixing things that broke down in predictable ways, is that character reveals itself under pressure, not during ordinary days. Colt revealed his the moment things stopped going his way. Nora revealed hers the moment she answered that phone call. I'd like to think I revealed mine during all those quiet months when I kept showing up, even when she pushed me away. The outcomes we get are usually connected to the choices we make, not in a mystical way, but in a plain and honest one. Colt made choices over years that built a particular kind of record. I made different choices. And when the moment arrived, the record mattered. That's the only lesson I have. Be patient. Be honest. Build your case carefully, not out of revenge, but out of love for someone who can't yet see what you see. And hold on. Hold on longer than feels reasonable, because the people worth holding on to are usually worth the wait. Nora was worth every single day of it.